On this Friday night, Twitter's ever-changing rulebook. How the latest round of suspensions has users scrambling and regulators on alert.
The move sets a dangerous precedent.
And the new warning for parents about another social media giant. Another round of Russian airstrikes pound power plants. The bitter cold and uncomfortable reality tests Ukraine's resolve. Waves of devastation. The massive cleanup effort underway after a giant aquarium crumbles. Plus, the Canadian atop the slam poetry world.
A swing that only knows the embrace of wind.
How this global champion hopes to raise the profile of a lesser-known art form.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Since Elon Musk, one of the richest people in the world, bought Twitter 2 months ago, users have been feeling regular whiplash after frequent changes to its policy that seem to happen on the fly. But this latest controversy surrounding the social media giant goes deeper. When Musk, a self-described free speech absolutist, originally announced he wanted to buy Twitter, he tweeted his hopes that even his worst critics stay on the platform because that's what free speech means. Now Musk has suspended the accounts of a number of high-profile journalists who cover the company, while reinstating accounts for several white supremacists and other peddlers of hate speech. Eric Sorensen reports.
When he took over Twitter, Elon Musk suggested let that sink in. But does he now risk taking Twitter's reputation down the drain? His latest controversial move stems from a Twitter account and links posted to it that tracked his private jet. He tweeted, "Criticizing me is totally fine, but doxing, i.e. posting personal details of my real-time location and endangering my family, is not." He then suspended several accounts of prominent journalists, even though he's described Twitter as the town square and himself as a freedom of speech absolutist.
Well, I think it's very important for there to be an inclusive arena for free speech, that they are able to speak freely within the bounds of the law.
But the journalists were within the bounds of the law. One is Aaron Rupar.
All of the people who were banned, beyond the commonality of sharing this Facebook link, the other thing we have in common is that we've all been critical of Elon.
The suspensions add to the perception that Musk supports free speech for some, including a white supremacist whose account was reinstated, but not for those, like journalists, he disagrees with. The European Union has now threatened sanctions against Twitter. Even the United Nations reacted because it views the social media giant as a worldwide platform for factual information.
The move sets a dangerous precedent at a time when journalists all over the world are facing censorship, physical threats, and even worse.
Musk, undaunted, jumped onto Twitter Live last night where journalists were discussing it all, including some who were suspended from Twitter.
Everyone's going to be treated the same. You're not special because you're a journalist.
Afterwards, Twitter Live was disabled. To many, Musk is deeply damaging what he spent $44 billion to own.
If he believes, as he claims to, that Twitter is going to be a kind of a public forum for all opinions, he's clearly given the lie to that. That's not what he wants. He wants it simply to be a reflection of his own ideas and nobody else's.
Twitter is a private enterprise, so Musk can ban who he wants. But his personal interventions have come at a cost. The stock price of Tesla, his big e-vehicle enterprise, has plunged, and Musk has lost his crown as the world's richest man. Something else to let sink in. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Let's now zero in on those stocks today. Tesla's shares slumped once again to around $150 US. Compare that to when they closed a trading day in January, just shy of $400. The company's value has fallen from over $1 trillion to below $500 billion. It hasn't helped that Musk sold $23 billion worth of Tesla stocks since April. Many believe it was to fund his expensive Twitter acquisition. And as Twitter faces scrutiny over its blocking, another platform, TikTok, faces accusations of not doing enough to protect vulnerable teens from harmful content. Researchers of the UK says content linked to eating disorders and self-harm is pushed on teens at an alarmingly rapid pace, and they want parents to know the risks. Jackson Prosco reports.
Millions of teens hold TikTok in the palm of their hand. Researchers worry the app has an increasingly powerful grip on them.
TikTok is this sort of weapons-grade version of social media in which it aggressively, ferociously pushes new content constantly.
A study from the nonprofit Center for Countering Digital Hate found TikTok bombards young teens with potentially harmful content. They set up 8 test accounts as 13-year-old girls in Canada, the US, UK, and Australia, where the average young user spends 80 minutes per day on the app.
We found that eating disorder content was being served up within minutes, self-harm content within 2.5 minutes, and every 39 seconds, these test accounts on the recommended For You page were getting harmful content.
CCDH says its research found videos relating to eating disorders had 13 billion views alone. That included potentially harmful material, alongside stories of recovery and support, commingled under the same hashtags.
And we also know that the platforms like Instagram and TikTok that are really focused on like visual representation, where kids are comparing themselves to other people, tend to have worse effects, particularly for girls.
In a statement, a spokesperson for TikTok questioned the study, saying this activity and resulting experience does not reflect genuine behavior or viewing experiences of real people. We regularly consult with health experts, remove violations of our policies, and provide access to supportive resources for anyone in need. TikTok also says it regularly removes the types of content identified in the report if it violates community guidelines. TikTok is of particular concern both because of its popularity and because its Chinese parent company offers a far more regulated version of the platform in China, with time limits and educational content for young teens.
I think it's very striking that they are feeding American children a much different product.
That has opened TikTok up to new levels of scrutiny as governments weigh whether it's time to end the self-regulation of social media. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Many people in and around Ottawa spent the day digging out after a heavy and wet snowfall. School bus routes across Ottawa and eastern Ontario were cancelled today, although schools stayed open. A snowfall warning is still in effect for the capital, with Environment Canada calling for 20 to 30 centimetres of snow by Saturday morning. After the Liberal government announced it's delaying the expansion of this country's medically assisted dying laws, many gave a sigh of relief. Starting in March, people whose sole underlying condition is a mental disorder would have been eligible to end their lives. As Ottawa puts the plan on pause, Taria Isri speaks to some on the front lines of this deeply personal debate.
Georgia Vrakis is a talented painter, but her true passion is psychology, and she has a unique perspective as both a therapist and patient.
Unbroken by Georgia Vrakis.
Vrakis began suffering from depression at 23 years old, but it took 2 decades before she got the right diagnosis.
I was having a major depressive episode, and I didn't understand what was happening to me. And I just wanted to die.
Once Vrakis learned she had bipolar disorder, she received the proper treatment and medication. But she worries about what could have happened if medical assistance in dying, or MAID, had been available in her darkest hours, when she felt she had nowhere else to go.
The thing is, if they had offered me something like that, after, because, suffering, years of suffering, I may have said yes. Maybe a year ago.
Dr. Vrakis, you have 5 minutes.
Vrakis testified before a parliamentary committee that Canada should not open MAID up to people with mental illness. They would have been eligible in March until the federal government backtracked.
We know we need to get this right.
The Liberals are planning to extend the deadline after psychiatrists across the country warned the healthcare system was not ready, including Dr. Simon Hatcher at the Ottawa General Hospital.
We can't be bothered to fund decent mental health services, but we can fund your death.
Dr. Hatcher says there are still too many unknowns.
What are the rules around deciding what makes something irreversible?
It's not clear how long the extension will last because the Liberals still have to table legislation in the new year. But the Justice Minister says he has no intentions on backing away from the plan.
We have rigorous eligibility criteria.
Supporters insist there are proper safeguards and argue the delay will only prolong suffering.
A lot of people with mental disorders will yet again feel like they're being told by their government and being told by their society that their diseases aren't as painful as those with physical disorders.
Instead of trying to, find ways to, so we die with dignity, maybe we should focus on helping us live with dignity.
A life and death debate as Canada prepares to enter new legal territory. Taria Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
The federal government released some documents earlier this week confirming that the country's most senior bureaucrats were well aware of attempts by the Chinese government to interfere in the 2019 election. Those senior bureaucrats work in the Privy Council Office, or PCO. That's one of the most important offices when it comes to advising the Prime Minister. But what role does the PCO actually play on a daily basis? Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, for that. David, tell us more about the work those bureaucrats do and how the intelligence they get makes its way to decision makers like the PM.
Well, Farah, the documents released this week contain a significant amount of top secret information, and as a result, the documents are heavily censored. Now, we know they reference potential election interference by China, but it's impossible to say where the PCO obtained that intelligence about Chinese interference, nor is it clear what, if anything, the government did with that information.
We set up specifically for this purpose an elections oversight panel to make sure that foreign interference did not have an impact on our election, on our electoral processes. And in both 2019 and 2021, Canadians can be reassured that our election integrity held.
Still, the documents on Chinese election interference, combined with evidence heard during the Emergencies Act Commission, provides new insights into the working of the Privy Council Office, even as it raises new questions about how information gets from PCO intelligence officials to politicians. The key official is the country's most senior civil servant, known as the clerk of the Privy Council. The current office holder is Janice Charette.
I'm also the advisor on all matters that would be before the Prime Minister for his consideration and decision.
In other words, if the PM knows about it, the clerk knows about it.
I get briefed up on it all the time, and our intelligence and security agencies continue to act responsibly and ensure that we're minimizing and avoiding any serious impact on Canadians.
Another PCO official, the National Security and Intelligence Advisor, does those briefings. Her name is Jody Thomas, but any advice from Thomas also goes through the clerk first.
I sign it off as the National Security Advisor, but she also reviews it and signs it before it goes to the Prime Minister. Verbal briefs, cabinet briefs, discussions with the Prime Minister, the clerk is in the room.
The PCO might best be described as the bureaucratic twin to the PMO, the Prime Minister's office. Together, the two offices are the most powerful and important organizations in the Canadian government. But as we saw during the Emergencies Act Commission, and again with the paper trail on Chinese election interference, there is much about the work of the PCO and the PMO that remains concealed from public scrutiny. Farah.
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thank you, David. Keeping spirits high as airstrikes rain down. Coming up, how Ukrainians came together in the face of another major Russian offensive. Ukrainian folk songs and some dancing helped lift spirits in a Kyiv subway station today. Residents were taking shelter as Russia pounded Ukraine with dozens of missiles. Moscow is accused of weaponizing winter, targeting Ukraine's power grid in relentless attacks. Heating and electricity in at least 4 cities is down as temperatures dip below freezing across much of the country. Our Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Goomansingh reports.
Trains ground to a halt in the capital, giving Ukrainians a safe place to shelter as the rocket attack warning siren wails. From above ground, the muffled thud of explosions.
Our anti-missile system works quite well, but due to the high quantity of cruise missiles shot by Russian Federation, launched by Russian Federation, we still face some difficulties.
Difficulties like the loss of power, heat, and water. Ukrainian officials say Russia again targeted energy infrastructure sites. This time, roughly 9 power stations were knocked offline, affecting about 50% of the energy grid. In Kyiv, there was a total blackout, but locals got to work at what's called an invincibility center. We heard explosions, the power went out. People need to be fed. We are here cooking on a wood stove. Generators, air defense, and the will of the people. 3 things Ukraine's Deputy Interior Minister says will see them through these dark and bitterly cold days.
Attacking our energy infrastructure, making people suffer during the winter time, that's about genocide of our nation. But I must admit that our moral is extremely strong and we will never surrender.
With that fight comes death and destruction. In Kyiv, several lives were lost and more than a dozen people were injured. As night fell, crews were still digging through the rubble of what's left of a residential apartment building. 1 child was unaccounted for. His parents and a 64-year-old woman had been killed. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
After nearly 8 decades of pacifism, Japan's prime minister announced the country's biggest military buildup since the Second World War. Japan will spend $320 billion, more than double its current defense budget, to increase the capacity for its self-defense forces, including a plan to buy long-range missiles. The plan would make Japan the 3rd largest military spender in the world after the U.S. and China. The prime minister says the growing power of China, along with threats from North Korea and Russia, puts Japan in a turning point in history. Fish out of water. Ahead, the aquatic disaster which swept a wave of debris onto the streets of Berlin. King Charles showed off his dance moves while enjoying some pre-Hanukkah celebrations at a Jewish community center in London. Each year, the center hosts a reception for Holocaust survivors and community members ahead of the Festival of Lights, which begins at sundown on Sunday. Former royal staffer Susan Hussey and Ngozi Fulani met today at Buckingham Palace for an in-person apology. Hussey apologized for repeatedly asking Fulani where she was from during a palace reception last month. Fulani was born in Britain and is the founder of a domestic abuse survivors charity. Hussey is Prince William's godmother and was a close friend of the late Queen. Tragedy struck a French suburb after a deadly early morning fire ripped through an apartment block near Lyon. At least 10 people are dead. 5 of the victims are children, believed to be between 3 and 15 years old. It took 170 firefighters to extinguish the flames. The cause is under investigation. A huge cleanup is underway in Berlin after the world's largest freestanding cylindrical aquarium burst. The giant tank was 16 meters tall and it housed more than 1,500 exotic fish. Witnesses say the centerpiece of the hotel exploded overnight without warning, creating a flood of more than 1 million liters of water. 2 people were hurt by flying glass and almost all the fish died. The hotel is temporarily closed. Some 350 guests have been moved to other accommodations. The art of a slam. Next, the Canadian poet pushing his unique craft into the limelight.
Three, 2, 1, engine ignition.
Liftoff for a mission to conduct an unprecedented survey of the Earth's surface water. A joint U.S.-French satellite is called SWOT for Surface Water and Ocean Topography, and one of its primary objectives is to help us understand how oceans and other bodies of water absorb heat and carbon dioxide, and the aim is to improve long-term climate change forecasting. A Canadian has done the country proud in a major competition that demands equal parts artistry, confidence, and precision. Poet Eddie Lartey is back from Brazil after walking away with top honors from an international poetry slam championship. And as Ross Lord reports, the new champion from Hamilton, Ontario, hopes the achievement will shine a greater spotlight on a lesser-known art form.
Tenemos a Eddie Lartey, Canada!
Slam poetry is an art form unlike any other, one that Eddie Lartey has come to master.
When you're sandwiched between nightmares and nightlife, every toast becomes a prayer.
Winning an international poetry slam competition in Brazil against 13 other poets.
Stories of love and of triumph and of glory are all universal, so thank you so much for sharing that legacy.
Where I get to report on the things that are happening in front of me. I get to dictate, and I get a spotlight that's placed on me, but I get to showcase it on the things that's happening around me.
Lartey built on the momentum he gained from winning the Canadian Poetry Slam in the spring on the strength of poems like this one called Gentrification.
There's a Catholic church being remade in the image of a condo. A hungry collection plate, an overdue light bill.
Residents drown in both debt and baptism. The church was built on top of a graveyard, and even here, the ghost can no longer afford to rest in peace.
At the Brazil Championship, his wordsmithing even cut across a language divide. It was interpreted in American Sign Language, captioned in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. An artist who's considered a love poet, transcending boundaries.
I'm always trying to make people feel good and make people feel loved and connected to whatever their purpose is.
Lartey's success could also mean greater exposure for slam poetry.
There's no hate language. You have 3 minutes and 10 seconds, no props, no musical instruments, except for the sounds your body can make. All original work.
Original work that Eddie Lartey hopes to see more of in Canada.
Strong enough to hold a cup, and know the cup has no hold on me.
Eddie Lartey de Canada.
Ross Lord, Global News.
And that's Global National for this Friday. I'm Farah Nasser. Tonight's Your Canada is this giant snowflake in Schreiber, Ontario. The artistic display is made from snowshoe tracks. Thanks for watching. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.